Hi friends. I invite you all to listen to a brand new story.
The first thing Greg felt was the weight of silence. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the heavy, suffocating kind that presses against your ears until even the smallest breath feels like betrayal. His finger rested on the trigger of the old Winchester, his eye fixed through the scope, the crosshair steady. He hadn't trembled in decades. Not once. And yet now, in the middle of the Montana wilderness, staring down at his target, something in him faltered. 150 yards away stood the animal he had been tracking for days, the legendary she-wolf the locals had nicknamed the Matriarch. For 3 long years she had humiliated hunters, broken traps, evaded every attempt to take her down. Farmers cursed her name, swore she was a demon wrapped in gray fur. But what Greg saw through the scope wasn't the proud posture of a predator. It was something else entirely. Her belly. God Almighty, her belly. It wasn't the natural swell of pregnancy he had seen dozens of times before in wild canines. It was grotesque, stretched into a perfect sphere, grotesquely round and taut, so large it dragged her hind legs with every step. She staggered, sides heaving, her golden eyes dulled not by rage but by exhaustion. Greg had tracked wolves his entire life. He had seen starving packs, rabid loners, mothers heavy with pups. But never this. Never anything like this. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And before he realized it, his rifle had dipped, his finger easing off the trigger as if his own hands had betrayed him. From the pocket of his weathered canvas jacket, something cold and metallic pressed against his chest. A worn silver dollar tarnished by time. John, the rancher, had given it to him days earlier, along with a stack of wrinkled bills. A lucky coin, he'd said. An heirloom from his grandfather. Bring me her head, Greg, and it's yours. End this nightmare for all of us. The memory burned like fire. John's ranch had reeked of blood when Greg first arrived. Even under the hot July sun, the smell clung to the air, coppery, raw, and unforgiving. One of John's best ewes lay torn open by the fence line, her wool soaked crimson, her body left half-eaten as if in mockery. John stood over her like a broken man. He was built like iron, the kind of man whose handshake could bend steel, but that day his eyes were hollow. Empty. It's her again, he rasped. The matriarch. Walked right up to the damn house like she owned it. She's not even afraid anymore. His hands shook as he pulled the silver coin from his pocket and pressed it into Greg's palm. End it? Please. I'll pay. Just end it. Greg hadn't answered. He didn't need to. The deal was sealed in silence. For him it wasn't just about money, it was a challenge. The matriarch was more than a wolf. She was a ghost that had mocked hunters for years. To take her down would be to prove, once again, that Greg still held dominion over these wilds. That he was still the man people whispered about in bars and backyards, the hunter who always finished the job. Or so he thought. The first days in the backcountry had been merciless. The Montana heat pressed down like a lid, the air thick with biting flies, the forest still and waiting. Greg followed signs most men would never notice. A crushed fern, a snapped twig, a paw print nearly erased by dry dust. But something was off. The pack hunted sloppily, recklessly. They abandoned half-eaten kills, struck at sheep near town instead of stalking elk or deer. They circled the same dry creek bed again and again, never straying far. It was unusual. It was desperate. Greg's gut whispered what his mind didn't want to admit. Somewhere nearby there was a den. A den with pups. By the third day his canteen ran dry, forcing him to trudge back into town. He hated leaving the trail cold, but thirst could kill a man faster than any wolf. Inside the little general store the air smelled of coffee and dust. And that was where he nearly collided with her. Claire. The new veterinarian. She'd come from Billings a few months back, a city girl with soft hands and big ideas about humane solutions and electric fencing. The ranchers laughed at her behind her back. Out here, ideals didn't stop predators. Lead did. Her eyes locked instantly on the rifle slung over Greg's shoulder. You're going after her, aren't you? She asked quietly, but with a firmness that surprised him. The she-wolf. Greg didn't answer, just grabbed a loaf of bread from the shelf. Don't do it, Claire pressed. Killing her won't solve anything. You take out the alpha and you don't end the problem, you create 10 new ones. The pack will split. Scared, starving loners will roam closer to people. They'll be more dangerous, not less. Greg smirked, a bitter twitch of the lips. You read that in one of your college books? Go tell John that when he buries another sheep, or when one of those loners comes after his kid. Out here, balance is simple. The strong survive, and the ones who cross the line get a bullet. Her jaw tightened. That's not balance. That's cruelty born of fear. Their eyes clashed in silence, the gulf between them wide and unmovable. But as Greg walked out, her words clung like burrs in his mind, irritating, impossible to shake, cruelty born of fear. He pushed back into the wilderness the next morning, his resolve steeled. If anything, her idealism only fueled his determination. He would end this once and for all. By the 5th day he found it. A ravine cut deep into the mountainside, thick with willow and shadow. The perfect hiding place. Greg lay belly down on the opposite slope, the moss damp beneath his chest, his scope fixed on the black mouth of a den. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in blood-red streaks. And then she appeared. The matriarch. She emerged slowly, dragging herself forward, every step a battle. And when she stepped into the light, Greg's breath caught. That belly again. Bloated, grotesque, unnaturally round. This wasn't pregnancy. This was sickness. A tumor. Water belly. Something monstrous. Suddenly the pack's desperation made sense. They weren't bold because they were strong. They were reckless because they were protecting her. Bringing her food she couldn't eat. Risking everything for a queen who was already dying. Greg's chest tightened. Through the crosshairs he didn't see a predator anymore. He saw suffering. And then, small shapes stumbled from the den. 3 tiny pups, their ribs like cage bars, their whimpers slicing the stillness like glass. They pressed against her bloated side, nuzzling for milk that didn't exist. Their cries cut deeper than any bullet. Greg lowered the rifle. His hands trembled. For the first time in decades, the hunter didn't see a target. He saw a mother dying, pups starving, a pack unraveling under the weight of loyalty and despair. And he couldn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Greg didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark on the ridge above the ravine, listening to the faint whimpers of starving pups and the ragged, wet rasp of the matriarch's breathing. The forest around him held its breath. He knew he couldn't just leave, but he couldn't stay either. Every hour that passed only deepened the weight pressing on his chest. By dawn, his decision was made. He rose stiffly, slung the rifle across his back and started walking, not toward his cabin at the edge of town, but toward the small blue-shuttered house where Claire lived. He knocked hard once, twice. On the third, the door creaked open. She stood there in a thin robe, hair tangled, her eyes still fogged with sleep. The second she saw the rifle on his back, her expression turned sharp, defensive. "What do you want?" Her voice was cold as river ice. "If you came to brag about your kill, you can leave. I don't care." Greg swallowed hard. The words caught like thorns in his throat. He wasn't used to asking for anything. He wasn't used to speaking much at all. "Help," he rasped. Just one word, raw and unfamiliar. Claire blinked. "Help who?" "John. You already helped him, didn't you?" The sarcasm in her tone stung. "Not John," Greg forced out. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in years his mask cracked. "Her. The wolf. And the pups." Silence. Claire stared at him as if he'd spoken madness. "I couldn't," he stammered. "Her belly, it's like a drum. Too big. She can barely breathe. And the pups, 3 of them. Skin and bones, clawing at her for milk she doesn't have. He broke off, the words tangling. His voice roughened to a whisper. "I couldn't do it." Something in her gaze shifted. The scorn melted into something quieter, professional curiosity, maybe even pity. "A tumor," she murmured. "Or ascites. Fluid buildup. Could be liver failure, heart failure. Either way, she's dying. And the pups with her." Greg nodded stiffly. "The pack's feeding her. Bringing scraps. Risking everything." Claire's eyes closed briefly as if picturing it. When she opened them again, her jaw was set. "All right. Tell me everything. Every detail. How she moved, how she breathed, what color her gums were if you saw. Did she cough? Anything matters." For the first time, Greg stepped into her little house. It smelled of antiseptic and herbs, bottles and syringes lined neatly on a shelf. He sat heavy in a chair, feeling like a child in church, confessing sins to someone holier than himself. He described what he had seen, clumsy and halting, while Claire scribbled notes. When he finished, she moved briskly, pulling supplies into a canvas rucksack. Sedatives, antibiotics, saline, formula for orphan pups. "I'm coming with you," she said. Greg's head snapped up. "No. Too dangerous. They're panicked. They'll attack." Her eyes flashed. "Then you'll protect me. You're supposed to be the best hunter in this valley, aren't you? Or is that just an old story people tell?" The barb struck home. His pride flinched. He nodded slowly. "Fine. But you follow my lead. One step out of line and we're dead. She zipped the bag shut. Understood. And so began their uneasy alliance. The old hunter who had taken countless lives, and the young veterinarian who had sworn to save them. They reached the ravine at noon. The heat was stifling, the air heavy with the stench of decay and sickness. Greg led the way, crawling to the same mossy rock where he had watched the den. What he saw nearly broke him. The matriarch lay on her side, her chest heaving with each strangled breath. Foam clung to her lips. The pups lay limp beside her, twitching faintly, too weak even to cry. But it was the male that froze Greg's blood. A gaunt gray wolf stood guard at the den's mouth, ribs jutting, eyes hollow with grief. He didn't growl. Didn't bare his teeth. He only whined softly, the sound low and broken, like a widower's cry. Claire raised her binoculars, adjusted the focus, and went rigid. Her hands trembled. She lowered the glass, face pale as ash. "Greg," she whispered, voice cracking. "It's worse than I thought. Look at the pups. Closely." He lifted the scope again, breath shallow. At first he saw only bones and patchy fur. But then he noticed it, frothy bubbles clinging to their mouths, the spasms racking their thin frames, the unnatural arching of their backs. His gut clenched. He knew that sight. He'd seen it once in a fox, once in a stray dog he'd been forced to shoot behind a barn. Rabies? No. His voice was hollow. No, God, not that. Yes, Claire said grimly. That's exactly what it is. It explains everything. The matriarch's madness, her belly swelling, her weakness. The virus wrecked her immune system, left her open to infection. She passed it to the pups, maybe even before they were born. Greg's hand tightened on the rifle until his knuckles turned white. The forest seemed to tilt around him. The pack wasn't just loyal. They weren't just desperate. They were guarding a time bomb. If those rabid pups ever staggered from the den, if one of them bit a fox, a coyote, a ranch dog, even a child, it wouldn't stop in the ravine. It would sweep across the valley, into the farms, into town. Claire's voice snapped him back. We can't go near them. Any scratch, any drop of saliva, and we're done. We can't save the pups. They have to be put down. And her too. Then we alert fish and wildlife. They'll lock the whole region under quarantine. Her words cut like a blade. Put down, she said. Like livestock. For Greg, it wasn't livestock. It was a mother. It was 3 tiny lives. It was the pack's devotion, their sacrifice. I can't, he whispered. His chest ached with the weight of it. I can't kill pups. Claire turned on him, eyes burning. And you can let them die screaming, tearing each other apart when the disease eats their brains? You can let them crawl out of that hole and sink teeth into the first thing they see? Where does your mercy end, Greg? Where? Her words were merciless but true. Greg stared down the scope again, the pups convulsing weakly in the dirt, the male wolf keening beside his dying mate. His whole life he'd been the man who took the hard shot. And this would be the hardest of all. Friends, if you're still here, don't forget to like this video and drop a comment. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Greg steadied his breath and lowered the crosshairs from the pups to the mother. Her first, he whispered, more prayer than plan. She doesn't need to see the rest. Claire said nothing. She only placed a hand on his shoulder, a brief wait, an acknowledgement of what this would cost him. The matriarch lay with her head turned toward the den's mouth, ears barely twitching, breath bubbling at the corners of her lips. The world narrowed to the dark bead of her eye. Greg's fingers sank to the trigger, clean, steady pressure, and the Winchester spoke. A single, flat crack slapped the ravine walls. The she-wolf jolted once and went still, an unfathomable stillness, the kind that empties a place of air. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Even the flies hesitated. Then from the den's shadow came a sound that cut through Greg more surely than the recoil. A low, wrecked keening. The male stepped forward, his ribs laddering beneath his hide, and lifted his muzzle toward the lifeless body of his mate. It wasn't a snarl. It wasn't rage. It was grief, raw as winter wind. Greg swallowed hard. He racked the bolt. 3 rounds left. The pups writhed weakly, jaws champing foam. Claire's voice was barely a thread. Quickly. He found the smallest first. The tiny body filled his scope, breath hitching in broken spasms. I'm sorry, he said and squeezed. Then the next. Then the last. 3 small thumps of dust rose and settled. The echoes died. Silence returned, louder than gunfire. Greg's hands dropped to the moss. He stared at the ground between his palms, at the pressed ovals where his forearms had weighed the earth. He had done what was necessary. It felt nothing like mercy. Claire's breath trembled once and steadied. "We need to notify fish and wildlife," she said quietly. "They'll quarantine the valley." Greg didn't answer. He was looking at the male. The gray stood very still, head low, breath fogging in faint ghosts despite the heat. Something old and cold slid down Greg's spine. "We have to move," he said. "Now." "Why?" Claire asked, though her eyes had already begun following his gaze. "Because he isn't looking at her anymore." The male's stare had lifted from his mate's body and fixed on the far slope, on the sliver of rock where Greg and Claire lay. He couldn't see them, not truly, but he felt them. Greg knew that look. He had seen it in men whose worlds had collapsed into a single bright point of purpose. The male turned his head and gave a small, throat-deep chuff. The ridge to the left breathed wolves. First a shadow, then two, then four, gray bodies, low and soundless, stepping out of the scrub like pieces of the hillside come alive. They didn't howl. They didn't charge. They simply flowed into position, as inevitable as water seeking a low place. "Go," Greg hissed. He slid backward, pulling Claire with him by the strap of her pack. "Don't run. Not till we reach those rocks." They crab-crawled up and back, trying not to shower the slope with scree. The wolves did not hurry. They drifted in a wide arc, angling to cut off the narrow game trail that led to the timberline. When they reached the first tumble of boulders, Greg risked a look. 6 wolves now, fanned into a shallow crescent. The male stood at the center, calm as stone. Rage would have been simpler. This was worse. This was patience sharpened to a knife's edge. "We're not going to outrun them," Claire whispered. Her voice held no panic, only the terrible calculation of a doctor watching numbers fall the wrong way. "What do we do?" Greg scanned the field. Open ground below. Walls of rock behind. The den downslope, tainted now, a place no wolf would willingly enter. He set his back to a shoulder-high slab. "We hold here." "You said you had 3 rounds," Claire said. "Had," Greg corrected. "I'm empty." She exhaled. "Okay." Then after a beat, "Okay." It hit him then how strange and savage this was, how quickly the line between hunter and hunted had burned away. He had taught boys not to mistake wolves for devils or saints. They were neither. They were wolves. And right now wolves had done what wolves do. Read the wind, take the measure of a threat, choose the ground, and close the door. The crescent tightened by yards you could count on one hand. Not menacing. Not dramatic. Just closing. "Do not raise your hands," Greg murmured. "Don't give them a trigger. We make no fast moves unless they come. If one commits, I'll jam the muzzle into its mouth and you're out of bullets. And you drive whatever you've got into the eyes. Knife, stick, fingers. Doesn't matter." Her throat bobbed. She nodded. "I have a trauma shears. And a scalpel." Greg almost smiled. Sharp as sharp. They waited. Time thinned to a bright wire. The sun leaned west, heat slid out of the day like water draining from a basin. The wolves sank to their bellies, forepaws forward, heads on their feet. Resting. Watching. They had all the time in the world. Greg's shoulder knot by knot turned to iron. He flexed his hands to keep blood moving. "You still carrying that antiseptic spray?" he asked, eyes never leaving the male. "In the top pouch." Claire's voice came from close, too close. He realized she had shifted to press against the same rock, bringing their profiles down to a single silhouette. Smart. Harder to count. Why? Because it burns. He filed the thought away like a dry match in a pocket. Minutes, or hours, later the light began to drain from the ravine, bleeding purple into the trees. Night would belong to the wolves. Greg knew it. They could wait for fatigue, for shivers, for the simple catastrophe of a misstep on loose rock. A pack could turn patience into a weapon as cleanly as a blade. "Talk to me," Claire whispered. "Anything. Keep the brain from inventing sounds." So he did. He told her about the first elk he'd ever tracked, how his father had made him circle the spoor 3 times before allowing a single step forward. He told her about winter sign, the way hoarfrost defined a hoof print at dawn and erased it by noon. He told her what you look for when a dog goes wrong behind the eyes. He didn't say the word rabies. He didn't have to. Eventually Claire asked, very quietly, "Do you think they're clean?" Greg flicked a glance at the male. "I think he kept them back from the den," he said. "I think he did everything an animal can do with the tools he's got." After a moment he added, "And I think the rest doesn't matter much to him anymore." The male's head lifted. No sound. No signal Greg could hear. But the 2 wolves on the far ends of the crescent rose and slid away into the dark like poured mercury. Claire's hand tightened on his sleeve. "Where did they go?" "Flanks," Greg said. "They'll try to own the angles." Force us to move. What do we do when they force us? Choose the ground. He nodded downslope. There's only one place they won't chase. Her eyes followed his gaze and widened. The den. Death has a smell. A language, Greg said. Even to them. A scrabble of gravel to their left snapped both heads around. A wolf had crept to within 20 paces, the slope and brush hiding its approach. It crouched, measuring the leap. Greg lifted the empty rifle by the barrel and set the stock against his knee, the muzzle forward like a spear. Not yet, he murmured, more to himself than to the wolf. The crouched wolf didn't come. Something else moved at the edge of their vision. The male rose. He padded a few steps to the right, head turned to a dark shape Greg hadn't noticed before. The hump of Claire's pack, abandoned in the scramble to the rocks. The male approached it without hurry. He put a paw on the canvas and pressed, testing. Then he took the top flap between his teeth and pulled. Nylon tore with a soft zippering sound. He shook his head once, twice, and the bag came apart. Vials rolled downhill, catching the last light like beads of water, and 4 set rattled across stone. Gauze burst into white petals. The male nosed through the wreckage, then set his paw squarely on a bottle of clear liquid and crushed it. The smell of antiseptic bloomed and vanished on the wind. Claire breathed. He knows. Greg didn't answer. He didn't have the word for it. It wasn't knowing the way a man knows. But it was something precise, deliberate. A message you didn't need language to read. Hope won't help you here. The crouched wolf to their left settled, as if the small ceremony had satisfied something in the pack's arithmetic. The crescent held. Full night came like a curtain pulled quick. The ravine darkened to shapes and guesses. With the dark came the cold, thin and eager, pouring down the draw like water. Greg's teeth tapped once and he clamped his jaw. "Tell me you have a light," Claire whispered. Greg patted his belt. His fingers found the cold cylinder of an old heavy flashlight, scuffed metal and glass. He had carried it for years and used it twice. He tugged it free, weighing it. "I do." "Don't turn it on," she said immediately, and he could hear the vet in her now, the clipped competence that had no time for hope without plan. "You'll give them a target." "I'm not going to paint us," Greg said. "I'm going to paint them." A wolf shifted. Pebbles ticked down the slope like a clock. "You said antiseptic burns?" Claire murmured, almost to herself. "And I've got a lighter." He could hear her digging, the small zipper, the soft clink of metal. A focused light could blind them for a second. A flame could shock them for a breath. "A breath is all I need," Greg said. He lowered the rifle's muzzle to his thigh and rolled his shoulders back until the ache found a new shape. If the male goes down, the spine of this thing might break. "And if it doesn't? Then we move," he said. "Down. Fast." A moment's silence. Then, "Okay." He handed her the flashlight. "On my mark, straight into their eyes. Sweep, don't hold or they'll adjust." She took the light. He could feel the warmth of her hand brush his knuckles. It lingered an instant, a human weight against all that cold intention prowling in the dark. "Greg," she said. "Yeah. You did the right thing, back there." The words were barely audible. Even if it didn't feel like it. His throat worked. He breathed once, slow. "I'll tell myself that when we're home." He raised the rifle like a pike again and sighted down the barrel, not to aim but to align his body with the shape in his mind. The male, centered, curious, always a little higher than you guess. He listened for the small sounds that separate shadow from body. Claws ticking stone, breath carried sideways by a fickle wind, a pebble displaced not by gravity but by muscle. The night pressed closer. Somewhere down in the ravine a fly, late, stubborn, buzzed and fell silent. The den mouth was a darker hole within the dark. Death had a language. Wolves could read it. So could men. "Ready?" he whispered. Claire's hand tightened on the flashlight. He heard the tiny roll of the lighter's wheel as she checked it without sparking. "3, he said, and his voice no longer shook. 2. The crescent stirred. The male took 2 soft steps as if answering a call only he could hear. 1. Now. A burst of white fire ripped through the dark. Claire swept the beam wide, catching yellow eyes in the blackness like glass marbles. The wolves flinched, snarls snapping as light seared into their retinas. In the same heartbeat, Claire clicked the lighter and pressed the spray. An improvised flamethrower spat a short, vicious tongue of fire. The night itself seemed to recoil. The pack reeled, but only for a breath. Greg had used that breath well. The rifle braced against the rock, its muzzle lined with instinct, not sight. He squeezed. The shot thundered in the ravine, louder than anything before, the echo slamming back and forth until it seemed the whole valley shuddered. The male's silhouette jerked once. He staggered, front legs buckling, chest collapsing into the dust. For one stunned moment, the world froze. Then hell broke loose. The wolves exploded into motion. Not the panicked scatter of frightened beasts, but a cold, coordinated strike. Two came head-on, teeth bared, while the others vanished into the flanks, circling. Dust and fur and fury swirled around the rocks. "Move!" Greg bellowed, yanking Claire's arm. They sprinted downslope, half sliding, half falling through shale and brush. Gravel tore at their palms. Branches whipped their faces. Behind them, the guttural rhythm of paws shook the earth. "Where?" Claire gasped. "The den." Greg roared. "It's the only place they won't follow." They plunged toward the black maw under the roots of the ancient pine. The stench hit them like a wall. Rot, sickness, the metallic tang of blood still fresh. But Greg didn't slow. He shoved Claire ahead, ducked low, and together they tumbled into the hollow earth. The pack skidded to a halt at the rim. Growls rolled down like thunder, vibrating in the soil itself. Shadows prowled above, pacing, tails high. But none came down. The stench of death held them like a barrier. Inside, the den was cramped, close, the dirt damp and clinging. Greg braced his back against the packed wall, chest heaving, rifle empty across his lap. Claire clutched the flashlight to her chest, its beam off now, her knuckles white. For long minutes, only the sound of their breathing filled the dark. Then the wolves outside began to howl. Not the wild chorus of celebration. No, this was mourning. Accusation. A dirge rising into the cold night. Claire's eyes glistened in the half-light that bled through the den mouth. "They'll wait." Greg nodded grimly. "Till dawn. Longer if they need to. They're hunters. They'll starve us out if they can't flush us." The hours stretched, heavy as stone. Greg's mind wandered where it never wanted to go, back to faces. John's daughter playing by the barn. The child's laugh. The thought of one infected pup slipping loose, carrying death into the valley, drove nails deeper into his gut. He tried to cling to that justification. Responsibility. Duty. But the faces of the dead wolves pressed against it. The matriarch, the pups, even the male who had met grief with such raw dignity. Near dawn, the growling ebbed. Paws crunched in dry soil above, but lighter now, fainter. The pack was moving. Retreating. Greg pressed his ear to the earth, listening until he was sure. Then he whispered, "They're leaving." Claire sagged against the wall, too drained to speak. When first light touched the sky, voices carried down the slope, human voices. Shouts, boots on stone. Greg stiffened until the words became clear. "Greg. Claire. You down there?" "John." Greg's knees nearly buckled with relief. He crawled to the entrance and waved. A cluster of men stood above, rifles slung, eyes sharp with worry. John pushed to the front, his weathered face etched with exhaustion. They climbed out together, filthy, hollow-eyed. John's gaze followed Greg's to the clearing where the bodies lay, the matriarch, the limp pups, the blood-darkened dirt. His jaw tightened. He bent, picked up an empty shell casing from the ground, and rolled it between calloused fingers. "You didn't just kill her like a beast," John said finally, voice low. "You saw what she was fighting for." Greg couldn't answer. He pressed the silver dollar into John's palm along with the unused bills. "I didn't finish your job." John stared at the money, then shook his head. "Keep it. You did more. You saved us all." He pushed the coin back. "But the dollar, you keep that. Let it remind you of her." Greg's fingers closed around the tarnished silver. It burned like ice in his fist. Beside him, Claire said softly, "It's over." But Greg knew better. It wasn't over. Not for the wolves who had survived. Not for the pack whose eyes had held something too close to understanding. And not for him, a hunter who had crossed the line between mercy and cruelty and discovered how thin it truly was. The valley was safe. The people would live. But the wilderness had changed him, carved scars he would carry longer than any wound. And somewhere deep in the pines, a mourning howl still echoed. Subscribe, share, and tell your story. Because sometimes wild things save us right back.
Bye-bye.